Welcome to this edition of the Legislative Lens podcast presented by the Ventura County Coastal Association of Realtors. My name is Rob Leatherwood. I'm the Government Affairs Director, and joining us today is Dominic Kardum and Jorge DeLeon. Dominic is the Senior Deputy District Attorney.
That's correct, with the in the Real Estate Fraud Unit.
In the Real Estate Fraud Unit with the District Attorney's Office. And then Jorge is Chairman of REFAT, the Real Estate Fraud Advisory Team. So today we're going to be talking real estate fraud, what's going on out in the market, and how consumers can protect themselves. So gentlemen, thank you for joining us today.
It's a pleasure.
My pleasure.
Awesome. So let's talk a little bit about REFAT and the inception of REFAT. How long has REFAT been around, and what do they do?
Well, the Real Estate Fraud Advisory Team, its inception came out of the need to address a concern that we had in the real estate community with a lot of different types of real estate fraud that was happening out there. A lot of people had their head in the sand as to the reality of how much real estate fraud was affecting our community, both financially and families being affected. The origins came out of this loan modification scams, where a lot of people had been losing their homes because people, coming to home, to residents that were under stress.
Like, when is this? What time? What period of time is this?
Wow, we're talking in the early 2000s.
Okay,
2005.
Yeah, 2005.
If memory serves.
Sure.
Right, about 2005. Jim Keith, an icon in the real estate community, saw the opportunity to work with the district attorney's office, and this is where the inception of the Real Estate Fraud Advisory Team came up.
And with the real estate fraud division at the district attorney's office, tell us, Dominic, a little bit about what you do and what your department does.
So the Real Estate Fraud Unit is a prosecution unit at the Ventura County DA's office, designated solely to investigate, prosecute real estate fraud schemes, which I'm sure we'll discuss could involve a variety of different schemes and frauds. So we are uniquely equipped to. It's typically staffed with a senior level prosecutor who is more experienced, and then a full-time investigator, and then we also have also support from forensic accountants if necessary, and other types of professional law enforcement personnel. So our sole aim is aimed solely at real estate fraud and nothing else.
Do other district attorney offices in California have these offices, or is this like a uniquely Ventura County thing?
No, other offices throughout the state have real estate fraud units. We were one of the first offices, if not the first office, to form a real estate fraud unit. And while the goal is typically to staff it with someone who has a real estate license, like I have a real estate broker's license, and the former attorney or attorneys who have been in this assignment have also been real estate professionals. Not everyone, but to answer your question directly, yes, other district attorneys' offices throughout the state of California have real estate fraud units.
Interesting. So let's talk a little bit about the collaboration between the DA's office and REFAT. What has that looked like over the years? What does it entail, and what does it not involve?
Okay.
Well, it's not as sexy as it would appear to be, having to sit right next door to our DA and, going through files to see who can actually prosecute. No, that's not how it is. It's a true collaboration where every month we have a meeting with Dominic. We discuss what's going on as far as some of the cases that they're coming across. And then that gives us an opportunity to now create awareness in our real estate community so we can notify the community and the real estate agents as to what to look out for to prevent real estate fraud.
So this is about like protecting your clients.
Protecting the clients, right. So it's based on the workload that the district attorney's office would have in the real estate fraud, I think it would almost be impossible for them to go past doing the public, service announcements as to what's going on. So we digest the information and we make it as easy as possible for people to understand what's going on. And then we create a marketing strategy around that to inform the consumers, inform the real estate agents, and really using real estate agents as a way for us to, get the word out.
Right. And just to follow up on Jorge's point, so it is a very unique collaboration between our office and REFAT, where we will work together to get the word out to prevent, detect, and report real estate fraud, right? And also from our perspective, what we're seeing from a law enforcement agency's standpoint with what types of complaints are we receiving? What are the what are the frauds, what are the current schemes of the day, so to speak. And so we will collaborate with REFAT because REFAT's comprised of local real estate professionals like agents, brokers, people from the lending industry or title that have their ear to the ground, so to speak, with their clients and then the community we serve. We're all serving the same community, right? So we rely on each other to educate each other and also work together to get the mission of REFAT, which again is to prevent, detect, and report real estate fraud out to the community. To number one, if a crime is ongoing, then we encourage people to report it. And REFAT has resulted in some referrals, and in fact, quite a few referrals from REFAT personnel or from clients that REFAT personnel come into contact with, where they've filed a complaint with our office and we've prosecuted it to conviction. That's not to say that the members of REFAT use REFAT to market their services, but they do get the word about how to file a complaint with our office, which I'm sure we'll cover, and how we can serve someone who we think has been the victim of a real estate fraud type crime.
So can you talk a little bit about, in your experience, both as a real estate agent and as an attorney, how has your experience influenced how you approach your position at REFAT?
So thank you for asking the question, because it's a very interesting scenario. As a real estate practitioner, my perspective is, how does this situation affect a consumer, and how do I help a real estate agent to be able to protect, the consumers as a whole, not just our clients? So it's a very interesting, perspective as to how to serve the real estate fraud advisory team. We operate pretty much we don't advertise to promote ourselves or our business. We're just there serving as a way to provide a resource for the district attorney's office, again, to communicate what's going on and how to protect themselves. And then we also do, we provide some feedback. We have a hotline where people call in and let us know what's going on. Because of the Facebook page that we have, people know that real estate fraud advisory team is out there. So they will call in and find out, hey, is this is what's going on? Who do I inform, or how do I help my clients? So
REFAT will help connect a consumer that's having a problem with the next step, whether they need to talk to Dominic's office or the sheriff or whoever.
Yeah, we become a liaison. So we have someone that will take the phone call, kind of sort through it, and then guide it to, if it's something that is something that the Department of Real Estate can actually investigate. Maybe there's not a crime, but if it's something that we think is something that they should be investigated, we actually will contact Dominic's office and find out if it's something that they should file.
Do you feel like your experience as a real estate broker has uniquely prepared you to serve in this role? Do you feel like an attorney that doesn't have that prior experience maybe couldn't do the job? Because I think that would be a poor characterization. A lot of people are very, very clever, but maybe you have like a couple steps ahead on somebody like that.
Right. Well, it certainly doesn't hurt, right? But not, like I mentioned earlier, the prosecutors prior to my assignment and in this position have not all been real estate licensees, right? Now, the gentleman that started REFAT and started our real estate fraud unit happens to be a real estate broker, and I happen to be a real estate broker. I think having that license allows me to relate and to be able to interpret the documents that I review on a day-to-day basis. And so that helps for sure. But I think that my experience as a prosecutor is what I call on every day to do this job, right? Because the documents, once you've seen a loan file and you've seen an escrow file, you're going to learn what documents comprise those documents. So having a license doesn't hurt, of course, but it helps, but it's not essential to what I do. Mm-hmm. Hopefully that answers your question.
No, for sure. So let's talk a little bit about when a real estate practitioner is out there, or maybe not even a real estate practitioner, because you can always have like FSBOs, like people sell their own stuff all the time. How do you differentiate between honest mistakes that people make and negligence? Where is the line on that? I mean, you can kind of answer it a little bit through like the DRE and NAR Code of Ethics perspective, and then you sort of answer it in California like Code of Statutes perspective.
Excellent. There's best practices as real estate agents that we follow, and because of our membership with the National Association of Realtors, there's plenty of best practices that we know that a real estate agent should be doing. Like, for example, a real estate agent should never discourage somebody from doing a full home inspection, right? As an example, right? That's not necessarily going to get the attention of the district attorney's office. But if a real estate agent encourages a buyer to say, hey, sign this type of document, or might as well let me sign for you, that is not a good practice. And
that's no good.
That is very clear. So that could be certainly a referral to the district attorney's office for, especially if the consumer comes to us and is like, hey, this guy made me sign these papers, or this person signed for me. I don't remember signing these things. That is, hey, here's this site that you can file a complaint.
In response to your question, essentially from our perspective as prosecutors, whether an honest mistake is going to be crossing a line in a fraud really turns on intent to deceive, right? Is there a specific intent to deceive the consumer or the victim by either the licensee or, to your point, not everyone that we prosecute are real estate licensees. I mean, in fact, I would say that in most cases and investigations we run, they're not licensees. They may claim to be a real estate licensee, but they're not. So, but to answer your question, it really turns on intent to deceive. Is there a pattern of fraud? Is there a pattern of fraudulent representations or a pattern of lies, to be blunt, to the consumer that caused him or her to part with funds under false pretenses? But the law is very clear. A straightforward breach of contract, someone breaches the contract provision in a car form, does not rise to the level of a crime that the DA's office is going to launch an investigation into, right? There needs to be an intent to defraud. And that is not always a bright line, right? It's really going to depend on the entirety of the transaction, what was said, how it was said, and but straightforward breaches of contract are not typically are not crimes that we're going to investigate, right? So it really depends on intent to defraud and what type of false representations were made in that transaction.
So there's a role here for when somebody, errors, deliberately.
Yeah.
There's a role if they're a real estate agent for the DRE, the Department of Real Estate, to step in, and then there's a criminal area beyond that.
Exactly right. And I think that if it's an administrative type violation, or if it's a violation of like Jorge mentioned, the code of ethics, or it's just sloppy, right? It's carelessness. Those are typically going to be referred to the Department of Real Estate or other entities that have oversight authority over real estate professionals, but typically the DRE. And then if the allegation points to an intent to defraud, then that would be something that our office would more than likely investigate. And let me be clear, not in every investigation we open, that does not result in fileable charges.
Sure.
In some cases, despite the best efforts of our investigators and a thorough investigation, at the end of the day, charges are not provable beyond a reasonable doubt. Our burden to file a criminal charge, not to get too far afield of the question, but our burden of proof is beyond a reasonable doubt. It's the highest burden of proof in our land, right? So not every investigation results in file charges, but hopefully that'll answer your question. Essentially, it turns an intent to defraud.
Well, if not just a real estate agent, but say a realtor member were to step into one of these, they could also be facing an ethics investigation at the association. Tell us what that looks like, Jorge.
Well, let's clarify. Yes, there's a difference between a realtor and a real estate agent, right? The real estate agent is, all realtors are real estate agents or brokers or licensees. A realtor is one who has subscribed to the Realtor Code of Ethics. So a realtor is going to be held to a higher standard because it's agreed to follow the Code of Ethics. There's several paragraphs in the Code of Ethics where an agent as a realtor is acting several steps higher than what the law requires as far as their behavior, their conduct.
It's an elevated standard of excellence.
It's an elevated standard of accountability, I believe. So yeah, that's the clarification. That's the difference between a real estate agent and a realtor. A realtor now is held to a higher standard because of the Code of Ethics. Now a group of their peers are going to scrutinize if that person has done something wrong. And that's something where fellow realtors actually will hold each other accountable, and through the proper means, the disciplinary actions would happen for those individuals.
So what could those disciplinary actions look like?
Well, in some scenarios, there can be a letter of reprimand. So in other cases, it can be a fine, depending on the severity of what they've done. It also depends on how egregious the error was. There's some people that go out of their way to deceive clients and so forth, and they really diminish the value of the Realtor brand. And more importantly, negatively affecting the consumer experience with the real estate community.
Could a member's membership be revoked?
Absolutely. Yes. And as a matter of fact, there's been certain cases where a real estate agent no longer can be a member of the Realtor community. Maybe after several years, they can apply again, but I haven't really seen a case like that.
So over the last 20 years or so, with REFAT's existence and the pervasive real estate fraud in Ventura County, I've written some notes here. We've seen title fraud, wire fraud, identity theft, rental scams are a big thing lately. What are the things that you're seeing out there in the market, and how can consumers, kind of start to protect themselves?
Okay. Well, as I mentioned earlier, their real estate fraud takes on many forms and takes on many types of. There's just not one type, right? As you've mentioned, there's title fraud and there's wire fraud, but
criminals are slick too.
Right, absolutely, and it's kind of like that analogy or that game when we were kids in the arcade, like whack-a-mole. You take out one and one pops up. And I want to make something clear with respect to we're talking about licensees and realtors and agents. The vast majority of real estate agents that I come into contact with in this assignment, and I think that Jorge contacts and you do as well, are hardworking, law-abiding, ethical people. Right? There are a few that operate outside the lines that we investigate, prosecute, and hopefully convict. But the vast majority of real estate licensees are hardworking, honest folks. But to answer your question, what am I seeing now? Recently, we've seen an uptick in wire fraud, where the scam is essentially parties in a transaction purchasing or selling a piece of real estate. And this fraud is typically done or exclusively done online through remote access computers, where fraudsters will gain access to the transaction through what the parties believe are secure communications, email typically or text, and insert themselves into the transaction and then steal the wire funds or steal the wire transaction, either deposits or closing funds or the sales proceeds. So recently we have seen at the DA's office an increase in wire fraud because like as you mentioned, criminals are slick, or they're crafty, so to speak. It's easier to sit behind a keyboard and gain access and steal money through a wire fraud as opposed to going into a liquor store with a gun, right? And in most cases, it's far more lucrative. So wire fraud is something we've seen an uptick in recently.
Well, and as I learn about more of the frauds that exist, I think before I started learning about it, there was a little bit of like a judgy kind of like voice in my head of like, how could you fall for that? It's it's so silly, right?
Right.
But the more I learn about it, like again, they're really good at making you think there's someone besides who they are.
That's exactly right. In a recent case that our real estate fraud unit prosecuted involved, we arrested and extradited 2 people from Georgia who were operating obviously out of state, out of our jurisdiction, but we have the ability to extradite if we have venue over the crimes, and we did, with a local family who was buying a home, and the fraud and the way they gained access to the email communications was done in such a way where the buyers, unless they were really reading that email closely, would not have detected that it was actually someone else posing as their escrow officer. And I think what you said is exactly right. I think in some cases, our victims are embarrassed. There is some hesitation to come forward and report it because people feel like they should have known better, which is just not the case. Our victims are, in some cases, like the frauds we investigate, there's a variety of different frauds. Our victims run the gamut with respect to education level. It's not, we have victims who are very well educated that fall victim to these types of schemes because those committing them are very, unfortunately, very good at what they do. And this wire fraud schemes are very hard they're typically difficult to investigate because the fraudsters are outside our jurisdiction or sometimes out of the country.
Right. Well, these sorts of frauds exist everywhere, right? Like with the internet, people are not like bound to a geographic location. what role do like banks play in fraud detection and prevention? How can they be part of the solution, or how are they part of the solution?
I think that there actually are involved already. I had to recently, I had to send money. I had to wire money to my parents, and even though the individuals knew who I am, because I bank, at a local bank where people I've known for a long time, they were asking me a series of questions. Hey, is everything okay? Do you know the people that we're sending this funds to? Who requested this? Oh, do you have a letter that shows where the request for the wire is coming from? Absolutely. So there's several layers of questions. Even if with technology you have the ability of wiring directly from your smartphone.
Yeah, it's like Zelle and Venmo.
Right.
Yeah.
But if you are wiring, it'll ask you the same series of questions. Are you in distress? What is this for? And it's very difficult for them to ask those questions because they seem rather intrusive, but they mean well because they're there to protect the consumer, because otherwise the bank could also be losing the money.
Right. Well, so I think that's a great segue to my next question. What is some practical advice that people out in the community can use to protect themselves on this? Like, I know you could say trust common sense. If it seems like it's too good to be true, it might be, but should they be verifying their real estate agents through the DRE? What can they do to protect themselves on a for sale by owner situation? What sort of advice do you have for people?
So I always go back to something that one of my high school teachers used to say. You should have talk to people. Always talk to people. Talk to people. And it didn't make sense back then, but now as I'm growing older, having a conversation with people about what's going on can trigger hey, well, did you double check that? Are you sure that this is the right way, right? So,
or you might be talking to somebody and you say something and they're like, that's not right.
Right. So if it doesn't sound right. So for example, we had a situation where somebody, an informed individual, their kids ended up falling for a rental scam. Mm-hmm. And the kids were, they wanted to do something on their own. They didn't ask mom, hey, they're charging me this much money for rent, which, was grossly under market. That is a trigger as like, wait, hold on, that's a red flag. Who are you talking to? That person ended up losing a bunch of money, right? But they didn't feel comfortable talking to other people about that. So that's where you have to have a level of trusted advisors. And I believe that real estate agents should be considered trusted advisors because those agents that are doing the right thing, they will actually double check and say, hey, this is not sounding right. What have you heard out there? And most real estate agents who are looking out for the community, they stay informed.
And in response to your question, what can the community do, for example, wire fraud? If you're involved in a transaction, you should always verify the wire instructions with a telephone call to your known designated escrow officer. And any type of change with respect to where you should wire money during the transaction should be viewed with a lot of scrutiny. And
so verify and re-verify.
Absolutely, absolutely, and not through text or email. Pick up the phone. Call your escrow officer and get him or her on the line and verify the instructions. Even if you haven't been writing, I still think you should double check. People, the case I just referenced, unfortunately, the victims lost essentially almost their life savings of money that they had put together for a down payment on their home. And it just takes a few seconds for the money to go out of the account. And it's very difficult for banks to claw those wires back. But to answer your question, in the sense or in the setting of wire fraud, always verify the wire instructions before you send money and double check with a phone call and confirm over the phone.
What about, so people are like really good at making an email address that looks almost like the email address that you're
spoofs.
The email spoofs. Mm-hmm. How regularly should consumers be checking the from email address? I would think like on every message, right?
Every single message.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And it sounds cumbersome as we sit here, in a conference room and record a podcast.
It takes a second to check it,
right,
though.
But people get busy, and the changes that are made to email communications or text messages are very, very slight. And if you're not looking for that change, then that person can become the victim in a wire fraud. Rental fraud schemes are typically more straightforward. You should ask for the identification of someone who claims to have the authority or the authorization to rent that property. It's okay to ask for someone's ID. People are, to Jorge's point, they're afraid to, maybe afraid is not the right word, but some people may not be comfortable with saying, hey, can I see your ID? To verify that the person you're dealing with is authorized to rent that property. If they claim to be the owner, then it's not out of bounds to ask for proof of ownership or before you rent a property, you should be able to walk through the property and look at the property. And to Jorge's point earlier, in the context of a rental fraud, if it sounds too good to be true, it more than likely is. If they're renting an apartment or a house for far below market value, there's a red flag right there. If you can't see the inside of that property, that's another red flag. If they won't produce ID, the person you're dealing with before, and then they're asking you for money up front, that's also a red flag. You should verify where you're sending the money, to whom, and for what purpose before you ever send funds, for example, in a rental situation. Right.
Would you encourage people to have a contract before they send money?
Yeah, absolutely. I think
because that protects people, right?
Yeah, well, unless the contract itself is fraudulent. But I don't mean to be, a glass half empty, but we've seen it. Yeah. That leases are you can pull a lease off the internet in a few seconds, right? Mm-hmm. And I think you need to verify who you're dealing with and that they have the authority and the authorization to truly rent that property. And if you're met with excuses as to why you can't see the property, but you're being asked to send money up front, you should never do that in the context of a rental transaction.
But I find that most property owners, they're somewhat skeptical about just letting anybody into the property. So that's the first red flag for me, that you're conducting business over the phone or via text with a person that is out doing something special. And I've never met someone that would be so willing to let somebody into their home by using a code, right? That in itself is most real estate transactions are either held by a representative or somebody local, right? And yes, there's a lot of technology that kind of shortcuts the process of getting an application filled and completed, but most showings happen in person still.
Finding permanent housing is not the same process as finding an Airbnb.
And even that, because most people that are looking for an Airbnb, they want to verify that they're dealing with a legitimate vendor, because it's kind of, you show up to a vacation and it was a fraud. And what I find interesting is that people are most likely to verify housing for a vacation rental than they are for permanent housing. Right? Yeah. Which is somewhat ironic.
So, right. And also one more point on rental fraud. Sorry to interrupt you. With respect to how you send money over cash apps or through money orders, that is an absolute red flag. We've seen a number of cases where that has in fact been the case, where people lose thousands of dollars in upfront fees for. First, it starts with a credit. They charge for a credit check, and then they want an upfront deposit, and then they want the first 3 months of rent up front, and they want to pay it all through a cash app online where it's faceless, right? So that is an absolute red flag, and consumers should not send funds.
So how should people pay these bills? Like what's the right way, right? Like is it cashier's checks, money orders?
Well, I think in some, to go back a little bit old school, there's nothing wrong with issuing a check or getting a cashier's check, but make sure that you are handing that check to the true, either the owner of the property or the authorized landlord. The party who is claiming to have the authority to rent that property should have some type of document to substantiate their authority to rent that property, and you should be able to see that property. Now, of course, I understand and I recognize that there could be a current tenant, but there should be a date and time where you should be able to walk that property before you decide to rent the property. People should not be renting properties sight unseen.
A current tenant very likely doesn't have the authority to rent it out themselves.
Exactly right. But what I'm just trying to describe is, with the current tenant, if there's an authorized landlord, they can make an appointment for you to walk through that property, even during the current tenant's leasehold. Right? They have to give notice with whatever the terms and conditions are of their lease. But my point being, you should not send upfront money to rent a property you've never walked into or seen.
Right.
That's my point.
You got something else on that?
There's just so many things that are common sense approach things. For example, when it comes down to the wire fraud, for example, I always encourage my client to not just rely on the phone call. If you feel more comfortable, go visit the individual, specifically in a real estate transaction, on a real estate sale. Go visit the escrow officer in person. Make an introduction, which is now the encouragement to the service providers to be more welcoming, to be able to be part of the solution in preventing fraud. Not just relying on hiding behind a phone or hiding behind an email. There's a lot of value in having a brick and mortar entity. and for a client to feel comfortable to physically go there and say, hey, before I send my wire, I want to know who I'm sending the wire to, or being flexible in making the adjustment for somebody to drop off a cashier's check in person. My clients right now, they're doing that. They feel much more comfortable.
Right. And we recognize that technology has a place. Like we all carry cell phones. We're all on phones most of the day, and it's a tool. It's a great tool, but the tool's being misused and abused by fraudsters to gain access to transactions and essentially steal money very quickly, right? So to Jorge's point, like I mentioned earlier, pick up the phone and call your escrow officer, meet with him or her, and verify, with an old-fashioned phone call or with an in-person visit. Hey, I got an email. Was this email sent from you? Yes. Is this still the account number? Again, parties in escrow offices, sometimes there's turnover, right? But typically your escrow officer is not going to change in 30 days, right? And there shouldn't be new parties to this transaction that pop up right before money's about to be wired. So those are some practical ways to avoid becoming the victim in a wire fraud. Yeah.
So REFAT puts out news through our social media. The district attorney's office has email newsletter, and I see their stuff on social media as well. What other news can consumers follow to keep informed on this stuff?
Well, you have the refat.org website. We have also the Real Estate Fraud Advisory Team, REFAT, on Facebook. Those are the two ways that we communicate. We do have that hotline, which you can find on those two, media sites. We haven't expanded outside of that because we really want to focus that. That's where people are following, and it's an easier way to communicate. And then also follow the press releases that the district attorney's office publishes. It's very easy to find.
Yeah, and we also engage in events like this, right? Efforts to reach the community, and our partnership with REFAT is meant to get the word out to the real estate fraud community, who in turn informs their clients, who in turn gets the word out to our community, right? But with respect to what types of outreach do I engage in? It's either professional outreach to agents and brokers, where I cover, maybe case examples or of completed cases that I can share. But then I also reach out. We do have outreach to the community and consumer outreach that I'm tasked with to advise folks on what are the current fraud schemes and how to avoid becoming the victim. The main part of our outreach is through our news releases. I think that when we arrest someone for a real estate fraud crime and then there's a conviction and we publish that conviction and the sentence, and in some cases restitution we can collect, that's really serves to get the word out, because it puts the community on notice. Okay, this was a case that we investigated. This was a type of fraud. And then oftentimes in our news releases we'll include some practical tips on how to avoid becoming a victim in that particular scheme that's highlighted in the news release, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and we also have an annual, we reestablished our annual fraud forum, where we have a symposium of 3 speakers that speak about ways to, protect yourselves. What are the most recent scams? And then the most popular part of it is the recent convictions of real estate professionals out there that have broken the law and have been convicted. So,
well, it sounds like, if I'm hearing you right, people need to use common sense. If it sounds like it's too good to be true, it probably is. Verify, both on emails and communications and the individual people that they're working with. And if they have questions, it's always better to ask than to make assumptions.
Right. And to the extent possible, if a consumer's, looking to sell a home or they're looking to buy a home, they can do some open source research on the party that they're going to perhaps give their listing to or hire to help them find a home. The DRE, if there has been a finding of some type of misconduct by a licensee, that will be public record, right? So
Superior Court has records also.
Well, that's exactly right. But you can find out if the agent or his or her broker is involved in a ton of civil litigation, right? Now, I'm not necessarily saying if someone has a civil case pending, they're committing fraud, but I think that it's something to look to see what type of reputation does this person have in the community. People, if someone does a bad job, the old adage, they'll tell 25 people, right? So I think, our consumers in the community should be advised to really to the extent they can, go to open source information like this Superior Court website or the Department of Real Estate to find out what's this licensee's history. Has there been a pattern or some type of practice of past issues with this licensee? And then also get some referrals, get some references. If you're going to hire this agent to sell the most important asset in your lifetime, in most people's cases, then I think you want to know to the extent who you're dealing with and get some current referrals of prior clients and ask, what kind of job this person did.
So name recognition doesn't necessarily equal competence.
Right, because it's interesting about real estate. It's very easy to promote yourself and pay to be featured as the number one real estate agent, right? So there's different resources, and not to endorse any of them, but there is a rating system. People will give a review to their agent. So when you go online and Google an individual or research an individual online, it'll have those opportunities. Of what the reviews are. I like to look for real estate agents who have the endorsement of a fellow real estate agent that is not in their same team, as an example. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we spend all day long reading Amazon reviews to buy like stupid stuff.
Right.
We should take the time on this too, right?
Right.
So I'm gonna give y'all an opportunity to give any final thoughts. Anything you got?
There's an opportunity for all of the real estate agents to get involved with Real Estate Fraud Advisory Team by logging onto the Facebook page, becoming a subscriber. That way you get for information about what's going on in the community as far as real estate fraud. And then if something does not smell right, please reach out to us and let us know, hey, this is what my client is experiencing. We will go ahead and direct them to the intake organization. Something that I'm very proud of is the fact that when we have shared some feedback as to how we can actually make this easier for the consumer to file a complaint, the real estate fraud unit in the district attorney's office has actually made some adjustments to make this easier and less impractical for somebody to file a complaint. So don't be fearful. Yes, it's a little bit nerve-wracking. Some individuals do not want to tell on other people because it could be kind of embarrassing to do, to be named as a victim, but just don't hesitate.
Right. And to Jorge's point, our complaints are in English and Spanish. Depending on the fraud and the type of scheme, like I said, our victims run the gamut of education level. The DA's office, I'll mention, does not ever inquire about immigration status with someone who files a complaint. We don't care what your immigration status is if we think that you're the victim of a crime. And it warrants an investigation, we'll investigate it and prosecute it. So I want to mention that for starters, which is important. Secondly, to Jorge's point, if language is a barrier, if some of the victims we serve in our community are monolingual, Spanish-speaking individuals, we have staff equipped that are bilingual, that are certified translators to translate complaints that are turned in solely in Spanish. I speak Spanish. I'm not fluent. So we have people that are fluent in Spanish if that's an issue. So people should not be concerned, number one, about immigration status. The DA's office doesn't care. And number two, if they don't speak English, that's not a problem either. We'll translate their real estate fraud complaint form. And if the process is intimidating for someone who might only speak Spanish, we have staff and personnel that can assist them in completing the form. We're not going to complete a form. They need to give us the facts and circumstances of why they believe they're the victim of a crime. And then they will sign their name, so to speak, in the dotted line alleging that a crime was committed. And then we will take it from there. But to Jorge's point, our office is committed to serving our entire community, and people that are maybe have a language barrier should not be are not discouraged. In fact, they're encouraged to file a complaint. And we've prosecuted a number of cases where my victims were essentially monolingual Spanish speakers. To Jorge's point, the DA's office partners with REFAT, but we're not on the REFAT board. We don't serve in a leadership capacity with REFAT because we're prohibited ethically from doing so. We partner with them to get the mission out to prevent, detect, and report real estate fraud. But to Jorge's point, REFAT, I know, is always looking for qualified, hardworking agents, honest folks that want to serve on REFAT to help get the word out, right, to our community. So if I was going to stress anything with the community is to be vigilant, use your good common sense. If you think a crime's been reported, then feel free to contact our office. Our complaint forms are online. Folks can reach our Special Prosecution Division at 805-662-1750. And they can ask to speak to me, or that's the general number for our real estate fraud, or Special Prosecutions Division where real estate fraud is handled. And like I said, our complaint forms are available online. And also by calling that number, we'll be happy to mail a form.
Awesome. Well, you guys are doing a great job for the community. Really appreciate you giving us some time today. That's it for this episode of the Legislative Lens podcast. I want to thank, again, Dominic and Jorge for joining us. If you like what we're doing here, remember to like and subscribe and share it with your friends. Until next time.